Mm, Today's broadcast is dedicated to you, our curious viewers.
It seems so good to see you back again.
Welcome everyone who is tuning in for this conversation as part of PICA's fundraiser Beyond Now. Thanks so much for being with us. My name is Roya Amirsoleymani, and I am one of the artistic directors and curators here at PICA, along with Erin Boberg-Doughton and Kristen Kennedy. I'm here with Tabitha, Nikolai, and Jaamil Olawale Kosoko, two artists who have been artists in residence with PICA and who are in ongoing conversation about new work that we might be able to do with them as soon as it's possible. And we will dive into some conversation on the topic of liveness and liveness now in particular in just a moment. But there are a few things that we want to say first. One is that we want to acknowledge that we are here in Portland, that PICA is our uninvited guests and settlers on the traditional lands of the Chinook, Multnomah, Clackamas, and many other Indigenous peoples, both recorded and unrecorded. And we want to extend a special welcome to all of the Indigenous people who are taking part in this virtual event today, and invite all of the guests who are watching right now to join us in acknowledging the Indigenous people whose land you are on wherever you are. We recommend visiting the website U.S. Department of Arts and Culture and their Honor Native Land initiative to learn more about how you can identify, acknowledge, and honor the lands that you're on specifically, and also want to encourage donations to the Navajo Nation, which is experiencing the highest rates of COVID-19 infection per capita on Turtle Island right now. And we suggest contributing to Seeding Sovereignty's Rapid Response Fund for that particular effort. A little bit more about our Beyond Now fundraiser. We're on day 2 of 3 of this event. It is all in support of PICA and continuing to do what we do and get through this moment. But instead of just having an event where we ask for money, this is really about inviting artists to do things with us. So we have micro commissions around small new performances for video, new video art pieces. We have testimonials from artists. We have objects that we're auctioning off that artists have made. And then we have, like today and right now, artists in conversation with us on topics that feel really relevant to the moment. So we want to thank all of the artists who are supporting and working with us on this event. They are also all being paid. So I think that's important to note. There are a lot of conversation right now around how we can think differently about the economy of the art world. And PICA is really trying to pay attention to that and think about it in collaboration and partnership with artists themselves. So thank you all for being here as the extended family and community of PICA, past, present, and future. Later today at 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time, we will release new video works by artists. The full schedule is on pica.stream. You can stream everything from there. We'll also have a public happy hour with a number of the artists who are participating with us and pica staff, and some other colleagues in the field. And then at 8 p.m., we'll have a dance party with DJs from Noche Libre, Latinx queer femme DJ collective here in Portland. If you're not from Portland and haven't heard from them, haven't heard them yet, they're amazing. That's at 8 p.m. Pacific. And then tomorrow, we have an 11 a.m. Pacific time conversation with Victoria Fry, pica's executive director, Kristen Kennedy, pica's artistic director and curator of visual art, and Christy Edmonds, who is the founder of pica, founded pica in 1995 when she was 28 years old. So they're all going to be in conversation on the topic of fostering the future. And then we'll have our main event from 5 to 7 p.m. Pacific time, streaming at pica.stream. We have new performances, new video work that we're bringing back. We have testimonials from a ton of artists we've worked with. We have a lot of material to share with you. It'll be a great party, as good as it can be without being in real life. So thank you all. That is my intro. And now to really segue into why we're here, I would like to briefly introduce the artists who are with us. Jaamil is here with us from Philadelphia. Hi, Jaamil.
Hi.
And Tabitha is based here in Portland. And both artists have been artists in residence with pica through our Creative Exchange Lab program. Actually, just last year in 2019, both of you were part of different labs. And both of you have practices and kind of ongoing projects and thinking that is so vast and kind of multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary. But I thought of you both in sort of imagining who we might want to be in conversation on the topic of liveness, because I really think that you are both thinking about that from really interesting perspectives, both in terms of how you're thinking about and using and speaking to liveness as a concept in real life, and kind of the presence of liveness, and then also how you're using digital spaces. And Jaamil, you just premiered a project called Chameleon that pica is a co-commissioner on, and that was through MPAC in New York, and you really shifted to a range of different platforms and thought differently about notions of liveness, I think, in the design of that. And so I'd love to hear more about that as we move into conversation. And then Tabitha, I've always been interested in how your practice really brings together kind of objects and sculptural material and kind of, it comes from a sort of visual art sensibility. And at the same time, you're working with digital worlds and realms and kind of online community and culture, and how all of that is brought together. So I want to thank you both sincerely for being here in a time that is, it's not always easy to show up. So
that's the truth, Roy.
So really, truly, sincerely, thank you. And rather than reading any formal introductions or bios for each of you, I would really love for you both to take the time that you would like to introduce yourselves and your own practice, and maybe speak to a project that is recent or current that is relevant to the dialogue that we're going to have for the next half hour or so. And Jaamil, do you want to start?
Sure, yeah. Thank you, Roya. Thank you for the invitation. It's really an honor to stay in dialogue, and to continue to learn alongside each other. I am, a performance maker, poet, curator. I like to call myself a public thinker. I teach quite often. I facilitate space, which I think at its core is just a practice in holding space and being able to really be with people, and to do that in a way that feels generous and caring and productive and sustainable. I'm fortunate enough to do this work, or I guess, pre-COVID to have done the work on a more international scale, you know, teaching throughout Europe, performing and teaching, you know, parts of Canada, the US, of course, South America, you know, South Africa. I mean, you know, it's been a lovely career, you know. I guess what else is important to know? I guess in regards to Chameleon, which is sort of the most recent project, you know, I took this as an opportunity. I mean, speaking of liveness, you know, I took this as an opportunity to really, you know, consider not only my practice of creating work or performance, but for me, there was also a proposal inside of there about sort of sculpting a life, you know, and just what it means to sort of exist and describe oneself radically and beautifully as possible. Which is to just say that a lot of the sort of creative strategies that I was using to make a work, I was curious about how could those same strategies sort of spill into my life, and so some of the same themes around justice and beauty and pleasure and care, not to only be theoretical, or sort of, you know, vectors of experience that I'm trying to negotiate with a specific ensemble, but just really how does that expand and move beyond, you know, the project, if you will. So that was really a way in which I was trying to kind of hack my own, you know, creative making process. And I can talk, you know, more about Chameleon, but I think lastly, I'll just say that, you know, with that project specifically, and I think with a lot of the work that I've been making, I've been concerned with how to create multiple ways of engagement and multiple ways of sort of entering into a proposal, into a project. And honestly, I feel that with the living installments that I was able to do on Earth Day, I feel like I came the closest that I've actually come to allowing sort of all of these interests and ways of working and being, and strategies and sort of engagement tools to really converge and play with each other and create a sort of larger cosmology. And again, folks could enter whether it was through the syllabus or through the film or the podcast or the archive, but there were multiple opportunities and remain multiple opportunities and vantage points for folks to experience the work, because I never really took for granted that anyone would necessarily see my work. Like the only way that one would experience my work would be live. I think a kind of accessibility modeling that I picked up early on in my career was to sort of begin figuring out how might I invite audiences and spectators and viewers and those who care about the work to enter in multiple ways, you know, whether it be digitally or, you know, I know that there are a lot of people that only follow me on Instagram, and that's perfectly fine, you know, and I don't expect more from that. So, so yeah, so just like I've always been thinking about how to use as many tools and possibilities that I have available to me, and essentially, you know, allow those to be opportunities for folks to engage with the work on their own terms, really.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I took a lot of notes because I think you've touched on things that we could take the conversation in the direction of quite a bit.
So,
So, thanks, Jaamil.
mm-hmm.
Tabitha, can we hear more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I come from mostly like a visual art kind of space, usually sculpture and installation work that is it always includes some kind of digital media, new media, emergent technologies. And lately that has been things that sort of resemble video games, but that aren't video games proper, like not satisfying in the sense of a game. So these kind of like virtual environments, and maybe creating visual rhymes, or like treating the installation with the digital piece as a whole kind of world building project where aspects of the physical help sort of buffer you into the digital world, and then parts of the digital world you can kind of take back out with you into physical aspects of the space. And a lot of times, the virtual worlds are around fantasy, both in sometimes a hopeful, futuristic sort of sense or a pessimistic sense, and a constant kind of ambivalence between those two things. That those things always live side by side, and often collaborative, because making games are kind of media-rich affairs that I often need help with. I don't come from a technological background, and that being those kind of projects being ways to bridge like this sort of abstract, fantastical, almost illustrative world building practice with something that's more a community building practice, to like bring the possibility of solidarity, from into a real like lived experience, even though it's often about digital experience. So some of those kind of projects have been, I did these sort of videos and plays in virtual reality on like a social VR platform, and got friends together and produced those as videos and acted together, kind of about the play was in this like reconstructed virtual dead shopping mall. So thinking about commons or loss of common spaces, reclaiming common spaces, inserting embodiment into virtual spaces, some of those themes. Right now working on some costumes to accompany an older game that's about sort of transmigration of souls, like passing from one moment to another, and not, these characters in this world that are like, they're called soyborgs. So there's this sort of separatist sect. So that's like another way of thinking about isolation, chosen isolation and the problems of that. That's some of what I'm working on.
Great, thank you. Also lots of notes. So, I just want to say again, and for the sake of our audience, that this is a casual conversation that can move in lots of different directions and flow. And I'm moderating loosely, but you all can ask questions of each other too, and that sort of thing, and we can change it up. And but I thought, some of this might have come out in what you both just said now, but really, if we could kind of dive in a little bit more deeply into this notion of liveness and how each of you actually think about that or define it or describe it. Like, I hesitate to use the word essence, but there's something of substance there. And I don't know that we all mean the same thing necessarily when we say it, but I think we all perhaps struggle in the same ways to articulate it, because it's often beyond language. So, but I wonder, nevertheless, if we might try to do that, and if each of you could just take a moment, to sort of say, what does liveness actually mean to you? What is that thing? And maybe how it's exemplified by your practice.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say that, for me, it's presence. It has much to do with presence, with consciousness, with the situation, and what is sort of coming off of a moment, and the sort of arrangement, the circumstance, but and of course I feel like some of these tools can align and do align with modes of, quote unquote improvisation. But I do feel like there's a difference there, because I feel like something can be live and radiate and be really just hot, but also not necessarily improvised, you know? And so I don't want to confuse those realities so much, just as to try to hone into, I think, what is the most exciting thing about liveness, you know, and the sort of and the sort of materiality of it, you know, and when I speak of that, you know, I think about it in a way as as a material that can be manipulated and sculpted and should be considered, just as one might think about I don't know, a certain color palette or any other sort of aesthetics that, you know, one might concern themselves with in the mode of production or creation. But I think for myself, it's incredibly important, I think, to kind of bring a sense of accountability, you know, into the room, into the space. I think that's where the stakes really are and exist. When we can really acknowledge each other, like, you know, be really honest about that acknowledgement, you know. And it doesn't always feel good. It won't always feel good. It shouldn't always feel good. And actually, I think the danger of it, you know, the danger of failing, you know, inside of the experimentation of living, you know, in front of people, on display, you know, I think there's something really exciting about that. And I have to also just say, you know, as a person of color, as a Black person, what liveness means, you know, to be alive in the world and to sort of use that as a mode uh, of sort of being and as a mode of maturing, you know, like, yeah, I am alive, you know, no matter the sort of social reality or construct, or historical, um, you know, markings that I hold. Uh, you know, I am alive, you know, and 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 we have to contend with that together, you know. So let's do that, and let's do that in a very honest way. And I feel like that's all something that I'm holding alongside the thematics of the work and the aesthetics and the vocabulary and all the other tools that go into, you know, creating a proposal, or an experience, a future, you know, a possibility that I'm inviting folks into.
Yeah, I want to put a little pin in that idea of accountability, because to me that is a big part of being present and with other humans. Definitely resonated with me. I think, you know, for me, liveness in my practice, when I do performance, which I sometimes do, it's wanting to have that immediate mindful experience with people, you know, those words as a kind of synonym, I think, for liveness, at least how I come at it. And it's like needing to have a moment of being in relation to people, and like, but in a way that lets me choose the terms of my own visibility, because as somebody who has this really fraught, complicated relationship with visibility, who at least feels hyper visible, I want to be able to, that liveness gives me the opportunity to control those terms a bit in an art environment. So thinking about that in conjunction with fantasy or virtual worlds, it's like, you know, I can bring in fantastical aspects, different rules of that world, where if I bring you in there in a performance, it's like, okay, you have to see me in the context of these fantastical aspects that I'm putting on, because that's in a lot of ways more real than real. You know, there's something truer there. And if I can take you and you can see me in that truer form, that's when we can start to establish empathy. Like once we can have empathy where I can control things how I want to be seen, and I can see you and we can have this moment, this like immediate present live moment, then we can do something else from there. Then we can start to build something else. I think about liveness too in the context of there's like a game theorist named Mary Flanagan who gets this concept from another theorist a while ago, just about like the idea of the magic circle of play, that in this sort of play theory you pass from like the world, whatever that means, like with its certain set of rule states, into like this world of play where different like new rules can be set up. That I think a definition of liveness can be like a real awareness of that threshold space and what rules are tipping over into this new space, going in with eyes open. And I don't know, a lot of my research lately too has been like into cognitive neuroscience sort of stuff. And I was just introduced to the idea of like novel memory versus cheap memory, that like when humans encounter things that are new, we're like burning more sugars, we're getting different neurotransmitters coming in, and it's really like we're able to think and recall older memories and all kinds of things in a different way. And that makes me think about, Jaamil, exactly what you were saying about it as a material. Like if it's like that state of heightened awareness by invoking what might be novel memory in that construct, like that's really something to work with, which is a big power for me in both the virtual and liveness.
It's so interesting, Tabitha, because I've been moving away from empathy, if I'm to be completely honest, and more towards compassion, honestly. But and not to confuse those two terms,
Break it down.
which I think one is certainly concerned with a kind of, I don't know, I want to say a kind of currency, which I think is a part of empathy. Can I make you feel what I'm feeling or something, And again, believe me, I am an empath. So I am one of the most, which is why I'm trying to move away from it, because it's a little dangerous for me, I think.
Yeah.
And as a result, being able to, kind of exude a sort of compassion and just thinking about, how might we as individuals sort of engage in, I think going back to that idea of accountability, acknowledging sort of where we both are equally, and sort of meeting each other, maybe in the middle, but that's a question or a proposal that I'm really pushing myself into, again, for my own safety. I think specifically in like this sort of COVID reality now, where I think it's really easy to sort of just really feel deeply and to the degree that it can be dangerous and unhealthy, honestly. I don't know if I'm ready to take on as much feeling as I think is being offered from every direction, whether it be digitally or just outside of my front door. Really, there's a lot that's asking of us, of our bodies, I think, in this moment. And we only have so much energy that we can offer, but again, I'll speak for myself, and I think those conditions shift depending on the individual and how, that person is and moves through the world.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think we've probably all observed this at different times, that the sort of like psychic and temporal reality of each person is is always different, certainly, but in this like, you know, moment of evolving crisis is just so up and down at any given time. And, you know, I guess I hope that something that can come from that in terms of liveness is like a heightened awareness of that it's like, oh, you know, being aware of the erratic nature of each other's psyches to approach that in a more gentle way. And I think it's you know, exacerbated by certainly the crisis, also isolation. I mean, when I think about, you know, times when I've been at like a psychotic break in 2010, and I was always at my worst when I was alone, isolated, because there was no consensus reality to connect to. And so I worry about that with people, and I worry about that in terms of people's access to the digital and the virtual, because those are really spaces, and it can be a good thing, but those are spaces where it's real, like, magical thinking can be indulged. You know, you can really like drift off to other zones that are gonna, you know, potentially magnify that stuff.
How do you negotiate that though? Like specifically as a kind of, you know, I don't want to oversimplify your practice by no stretch of the imagination, but as someone who's working consistently inside of sort of digital forms and digital play, digital sculpture, yeah, how do you negotiate that? Like that do you feel a sense of, I mean, you know, talking about accountability, you know, there's the work, and then there's like the reverberation of the work and the various effects that it have, you know. So I'm curious to know sort of how much of that interplay and that kind of, you know, sort of cultural arrangement do you personally, I guess, take responsibility for? Does that make sense? Are you following me?
I don't know. I mean, I got a couple of things from that. Like one thing I heard in that is, you know, just as a digital artist, managing exposure and interface with the digital. And I think, you know, to me, that's trying to carry aspects of mindfulness into digital spaces, which can be just so scintillating and distracting and that kind of thing. I think getting, you know, one thing that I think is relevant to the conversation too is like never knowing what we mean when we have conversations too about digital or virtual or internet.
Exactly.
And I think what scares me about it partly is that all of those words are now shorthand for social media and pocket devices. Like, where that's such a narrow version of like that positive, you know, psychedelic potential that the internet has, you know, that virtuality itself transcends that manifestation, those like walled garden kinds of technologies. And so, you know, the mindfulness comes in as like, oh, knowing what my relationship is with social media and trying to get beyond it. To me, you know, to me, those spaces are just largely very toxic. They're leveraged by bad actors in the terms of like corporate companies and states incentivizing negative affect and that kind of thing. But that's not technology alone. That's not virtuality alone. So like knowing how to hop over to that to other stuff. That was a weird metaphor, but
maybe we can talk a little bit more actually about what feels like new possibilities that are opened up by these shorthand digital and virtual spaces, and but also what might feel lost or impossible or you know, to be more of a struggle to, again, in terms of that question of liveness in these virtual and digital realms. And I welcome us getting more specific too about that language. But that might be a nice segue into what is gained and what is lost. And maybe also a bit about some of your choices in use of Discord, the platform Discord for Chameleon, Jaamil, too. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
I mean, you know, I'm certainly a skeptic of the digital realm, just to put it, I guess, frank.
Yeah.
I'm I don't have much trust for it right now, to be completely honest, and not even so much it as its players, I think, and those that sort of hold, um, you know, a lot of power inside of this moment. A lot of power in how our voices, our energy, our magic is sort of being consumed and, you know, sort of behaviorally analyzed and re calculated, and, you know, to create a very specific kind of algorithm that is sort of feeding us back to ourselves in
Yeah.
some strange way, you know, all in service of, you know, some corporations, you know, bottom line. Um, and I think this moment has asked me to become much more aware of that, and how I'm engaging inside of that reality as well. I think this thing that used to be just kind of a part of a larger pie chart, if you will, has suddenly, you know, what might have been about there suddenly like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
My movement, but you know, you get my gist. And so yeah, so I'm really skeptical about the way in which I feel so consumed and oversaturated, you know, and I'm trying to figure out how to survive inside of it, honestly. You know, how do I, you know, continue to make a living, earn a living, you know, hold the title as artist, and also protect myself. And yeah, it's a question, you know. And I think with Discord, you know, specifically, and as it relates to Chameleon, you know, for me, it became an opportunity because with that platform specifically, you can, you know, you create a server and you invite folks into it, and essentially that server, you know, you can design it to be anything. Uh, for me, it became a kind of studio space essentially. So it's a way in which, you know, I can continue to be in community and dialogue, invite folks into the room. Here's what I'm working on. What you think about this? It was also a way to, you know, because of the sound quality, it provides an intimacy that was really exciting for me, and being able to really hear a voice. And so, you know, I started uh, really attaching myself to the sort of cadence and vibrato and rhythmic proposals that certain voices, um, you know, reveal over time. And so just that sort of subtle beauty became something that I was really excited about, in a way that some of the other digital platforms just didn't really speak to me as much, I guess. And you know, let us be clear, you know, Discord is not like speaking to me, you know, but it's the best that I could do, you know, essentially, for that time. And so in that, you know, that became, you know, because it was new, it is new, it allows for a kind of play and experimentation that, you know, that I'm still excited about. And I'm still breaking open. You know, I'm curious to see what else is able to happen, and how might, you know, I be able to share this with, you know, with other sort of players in other parts of the world, uh, literally just, you know, through sharing a sort of a link, essentially. You know, it's an invitation. It's an invitation into my thinking, into my sort of yeah, into a way of being. And so, yeah, I think in that regard, it offered and still offers a lot of possibility. And I think I mean, really, that's all I can really ask for right now. You know, I want to hold on to as much possibility as I possibly can. Especially in this moment where, you know, it's easy to feel as if your life is, you know, is just sort of, you know, within four walls or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tabitha, I don't know if you want to speak to that question as well around what is lost or gained, or possibilities and impossibilities with these virtual and digital realms, which you problematized the terminology around, which I think is very important too. And as an artist who, you know, as Jaamil was sort of alluding to, a lot of artists right now are responding to the need for adapting to virtual spaces in this moment. But I think that your practice is one that has been open to it and has been using it and thinking about it critically and embracing it in certain ways for quite a while. And so I'm really curious about your perspective on it in that regard. So much is coming up for me, but I'll leave it at that for now. And I also want to welcome anyone who has questions from our audience to enter those into the chat on the live stream, and we'll see them. So
yeah. Also, Tabitha, could you also speak? I'm curious about safety inside of this, because I think there's, you know, I think it's worth just mentioning. There's a way in which, you know, being a live artist, if you will, and a performer, that sure, you know, we're in this practice of like being in front of folks and doing that, which actually has a lot of danger embedded inside of that contract, that social contract. And so what are the sort of safety, you know, practices that maybe you were able to find inside of your practice, and the kind of refuge that you've been able to find there that maybe has not been as available to you in, you know, the public domain?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think to try to speak a bit to both of those questions, I mean, as critical as I am of some of these spaces or technologies or platforms, I mean, there are also things that are super valuable to be able to go inside and to incubate aspects of a self that you can't manifest in physical space. If you can't be visible or participate in physical life for a whole host of reasons, these spaces are they're totally necessary. And I guess, you know, the safety question is interesting. I mean, there's, you know, certainly in like doing performance that bridges virtual and physical things, I mean, the avatar self, that layer of perception over the top of you is a layer to ensure safety. You know, it's like, okay, here's a filter that lets me be seen how I want. I think, and this is just me where I am with it too, partly is with performance and stuff, I want it to be a bit unsafe. You know, I have this tenuous relationship with, you know, like I was saying, visibility in the physical world, where because those virtual spaces were really powerful for me to go into growing up, because, you know, the society I was in really constrained the world. It made it super tiny. Virtual space could explode and be huge. Then when I come out into the physical world, I want to push back against it, and I want it to be a little bit unsafe, and I want to like not let the world squish me in that way. So there's like a little bit of an oppositional defiance there that I'm into. But I mean, especially with co-performers, co-collaborators and stuff, that bears thinking about. And I have thoughts about that might be tangents. And I guess in terms of other things that I hope come out of this, like I do think that even in a format like Zoom and that kind of thing, it's really great because we're habituating people to interacting, or at least seeing people's faces in an interactive environment. And that's a space to start building, maybe not fully accountability, but empathy or compassion or something back in, versus just anonymized little tweets of text that don't have that. And maybe that can help us sort of see the ghosts of each other's humanness in other digital traces, if that makes sense. That it's like, oh, like I've encountered fragments of you here, maybe those fragments exist elsewhere, and we can stop being so terrible to each other on the internet. But you know.
There was actually a question from the audience that this ended up speaking to a bit, but I just want to read it aloud so that you know this was asked, and if there's anything else you want to say. It says, is there a sense that the virtual realm has been a safe space for many communities, and now so many other people are flooding that domain, and it is no longer protected in the same way? So I think we sort of spoke to that actually, which is nice. But if there's anything you want to add, we also have a new question, which I can share. Can you comment on the ways that the ideas of privacy and intimacy are transformed or transfigured in this extended digital moment? I'm thinking of even the look into domestic lives of our colleagues, seeing their books, their art choices, how they interact with family, things we would never likely see even with people we may have worked with for many years. So maybe just to expand that out a bit, questions of having intimate access to maybe our perception of each other's selves. And and we don't have too much more time left, but I'm interested also in how we're thinking about each other in these spaces and kind of collaboration and relationships and the ensemble that comes together. So maybe, yeah, stuff around intimacy, stuff around connection in these virtual realms.
Totally. I mean, this is the part that I feel the most excited about, honestly, is it feels like the kind of portals that are being opened that allow us to kind of see into someone's life that we might not have been able to see in a previous reality, unless you were genuinely, like pals or buddies and like on, had a kind of FaceTime relationship, but you don't go on FaceTime with everybody, for very specific reasons, because you don't want everybody in your business, But now, yeah, that's shifted, and so, folks who I work with and I would have had a very professional relationship with, I'm like, oh, how's your little one doing? Oh, can I say hi? I mean, it's just like a whole other pathway of relationships that have kind of come into focus, but that I think is beautiful because it brings out a humanity there that might not have been as accessible or as acknowledged previously. So I mean, I'm honestly really excited about that, but I'm also really curious about how we protect space that is private, that is sacred, that is not meant for large publics to engage in or to witness, so that is a question as well. But
yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about that idea of protected space a little bit too. I have in having criticisms about these platforms that dovetail with just anti-capitalist thinking, it's like I feel more and more, it's like, oh, my jobs want me in my house on demand whenever they want me, to extract more value out of me here in my home, that I kind of need to be a totally separate space and to not have those things in it. But money is what it is. But
yeah, the valuation, right? That's something that's really become quite interesting to negotiate now. And I was already having this conversation with myself in regards to my own sort of sense of value and how I kind of negotiate that in the public domain and in various contexts, And so now that suddenly this thing that was such an export, I guess, again, it feels like, yeah, how do you protect some of those, because your home is your sacred, that should be your sacred space. And I know, many of us, have, well, many of us, yeah, are working from home. Not all of us have the ability to do that, and I acknowledge that. But in this moment now, where like this sort of corporate, structure has fallen on all of our heads, and we're sort of either to be consumed or to be consumed. It's really, it's frightening in a lot of ways. Suddenly, yeah, to just kind of be thrust into a cubicle. It's a lot, like the cubicle metaphor, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Well, there are these political economies surrounding any of the spaces that we're working within or inhabiting. The public and the private, the consumption around it, the corporatization and commodification can exist in those brick and mortar spaces that are designated as arts spaces, right? Designated as workspaces for artists or arts laborers of different kinds, and then the ways in which those are replicated or even more pronounced in these virtual or digital realms. There's so many questions that come up, but we have a few more minutes. I'm hearing a lot about sort of intimacy, private, public, commons. What does it really mean to sort of inhabit these spaces? What kind of self is presented or performed in these Zoom cubes, right? But just maybe to go back to this one other question I kind of had around how we're collaborating and connecting with one another right now, and you both work both individually and collaboratively in an artistic sense. I think you're both involved in community and in your own in kind of communities that you identify and in kind of broader art communities in really important ways. But yeah, just wondering how actually this is something that you had mentioned early on, Jaamil, how we're thinking about caring for people right now, given the tools and the spaces we have to work with safely. And maybe that includes ourselves, how we're caring for ourselves.
I think that's a huge part of it. Again, really, I mean, this moment for me is really asking me to sort of take a second look, like at everything, maybe even a third or a fourth one.
Yeah.
But as much as I sort of like, I'm having to really contend with how much I might be positioning or making statements that are moving outward. It's important for me to understand how those same values and that same vantage point and perspective needs to move inward as well. And I think when I say that, I mean, just as an example, early on in the when COVID was sort of hitting our shores, for me, I saw immediately this sort of weaponization of this virus, and I saw the potential of that weapon. The kind of the technological possibility of how this thing would be situated in a way that would become very politicized, and I felt immediately the repercussion of it and who would be the most vulnerable. And all of these visions and realities came just like really just rushing at me. And I kept having the thought, oh, this is the perfect storm. This is going to, like, the fallout of this thing is going to be devastating. This is going to devastate. All the while, I think what I was really saying is that this fallout is the perfect storm from which I can become unraveled and will unleash the perfect storm in me. to the degree where, and I think for some of us who are neurodiverse or have, you know, various mental, you know, realities that we're negotiating, yeah, it is the perfect storm of a number of intersectional realities coming into play and really asking us to to unpack ourselves deeply. And so that was, you know, that's just one example of how, you know, this proposal or this perspective that I was pushing outward, I had to really take a moment and figure out for myself, oh, what is coming undone in me? You know, what is the perfect storm that's brewing in me that this thing is unleashing? And how do I protect myself? How do I protect my spirit for the marathon, you know, that we all have to endure right now? So yeah, these were, you know, these were all questions that, you know, that were coming up for me.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
yeah, I was just gonna say,
cool. Yeah, I'm so into like everything that you just said. You know, for me, I feel like this conversation comes from like me talking to you from being inside a cocoon, both for the sense of being like insulated, but also really trying to think about what kinds of changes do, you know, my body, myself need to interface with this new, I mean, not new, because you're absolutely right. These circumstances of collapse, catastrophe, you know, exploitation have been going on forever. And trying to think though about like, what is this moment where I can pivot to interface even better with those, you know, if these kinds of disasters are exploited by, you know, fascistic authoritarian things in, you know, shock doctrine way, I want to believe that likewise, like small agile forces can build solidarity and act in a way that will also put us in a better position to respond to like whatever comes next. And so to me, that's another kind of like liveness of mindfulness of like, no, what we gotta be in this moment. Like it's tough, but we gotta be in this moment and do something, you know, whatever that is individually and for your people.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, because I mean, this is a pandemic amongst pandemics. You know, it's not the first and it won't be the last. And I think we have to really learn we got to learn how to get along. That sounds so trite, but, you know, with each other, but with Covina too, you know, like we have to live with each other. You know, we got to figure that out.
Yeah. I want to thank you both so much for being in conversation today and sharing yourselves and your thoughts and your words. And it's really an honor. And like I said at the beginning, it's a lot just to show up right now, I think, for the things that we're asked to do, invited to do, have to do, all of it. So it really is meaningful to share space in the way that we can right now. So it's 2:03, so I'm gonna wrap us up. But I will be thinking about a lot of what came up in this conversation for a long time. We could go on and on. A lot of gratitude for you both.
Yes, likewise. So nice to share space with you, Tabitha, with you, Roya. Yeah, and all of the folks that are here that we cannot see as well.
Yeah. It was wonderful to meet you, and thank you to the audience for tuning into this.
Yes, likewise. Thank you everyone for tuning in. And here on Pika.stream, our next program is at 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time, new video work. So with that, thank you both.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.